Morning, everybody. You're very welcome to this episode of Let's Talk Dairy. Today I'm joined by two people, Joseph Dunphy or Joe Dunphy from the Grass10 team in Teagasc, and by Niall Walsh, who's a technologist at UCD Lyons Estate. Sorry, no, we won't have Karina on this morning, but we'll get Karina another day on the webinar. She asked me, could we let Niall have a go at this webinar? So I said, sure, whatever you think yourself, Karina. You sure now you're doing the right thing? So she said she was. She's fairly confident he's going to be the man of the moment. We'll start with you first, Joseph, and maybe you'll just take us through our update for Grass10 for the coming week, a current and coming week, please.
Yeah, perfect. So thanks a million, George, for having me on. I suppose look at, if we quickly look back at the last week, sure, in general, for most dairy farmers, it's been an absolute dream in terms of ground conditions, trafficability all over the country has been excellent. It's been excellent conditions for grazing, but also excellent conditions for getting out a bit of chemical fertilizer and getting out some slurry as well. If we look at the figures again for this week, look at the average farm cover, and growth are relatively static as expected. But if we look at some of the dry matters that are coming in, George, over the last week, they're it's very, very high. They're up over 19% there from Moore Park from early this week. Now, we would expect with the bit of rain that's coming during the week that this will drop back down again. But I suppose it's just to hammer home the message that grass very dry at the minute, and there is feeding value in it. So it's about, I suppose, the importance of getting the allocations correctly and not to waste grass.
Yeah.
If we then just move, George, into, I suppose, the predicted rainfall and the temperatures and the maps for the coming week, there's probably been a little bit of rain over the last couple of nights along the western seaboard, but probably we're looking at in the region of somewhere in around 25 mil for the western seaboard, and 10-15 mil for the east and southeast of the country. So in general, ground conditions aren't going to deteriorate that badly, which is great for the middle of February, and it's going to give busy dairy farmers a super opportunity to turn animals out to grass. And then I suppose with the dry soil conditions, the slight increases in air temperature is going to change soil temperatures as well, and so we'll probably see another degree in soil temperatures over the coming weeks as well, over the coming week as well. All right.
Okay, great.
So I suppose just then, George, to cover off on a couple of key things for the week. Ground conditions are good, so continue to be aggressive and turn animals out to grass if you can. There's probably a little bit of we'll call it a split, or two things happening in the country at the minute. You probably have people, maybe autumn calvers, or early winter milkers, or maybe early spring calvers, January calvers that are have been grazing aggressively over the last 3 weeks. They're absolutely motoring through ground at the minute. And then maybe you have people more, we'll call it bit northerly in the the country a bit further, maybe western seaboard, or maybe only calving animals maybe in the last week or 10 days and are only getting going. All right, so I suppose if we were to look at that, was 40% of the covers that came in on pasture base there over the last few weeks were under 700. So if you just to hammer home that point is, if you've been grazing heavy for the last couple of weeks or grazing hard for the last few weeks, it'd be no harm to do another measure very, very soon, George, in terms of keeping an eye on that farm cover that it doesn't tank, because if you have a high demand, it'll you can take 150 off an average farm cover very, very fast. But in general, for the vast majority of people in the country, George, it's going to be, a lot of people are taking out a wet paddock or two, over the last week, and should do again this week. What I would say also with that is we have to think of the start of the second rotation, so that that fast growing, reseeded field with decent access, get a couple of those nipped off at the same time as well.
Okay. Just goes to prove one thing now, Joseph, in fairness. There's no pleasing you, because some of the time you're telling us we're not grazing enough, and now you're telling us we're grazing too fast.
Yeah, that's for sure. Never happy that.
I suppose what you're saying in reality, though, is so go on the third roughly for the month, but keep an eye on farm cover as well. It's not really the message.
Yeah, the last thing we want to do is, 500 is bottom, but we like to say 550 just to kind of keep that little bit of fat in the system. But so if you were starting at 650 or something like that of an average farm cover, you don't have much wiggle room.
Yeah.
So
and maybe the other thing then is you don't want to hit the 550 till the end of March anyway.
That's yeah. So it's going to be a very small proportion of people, but it's just, I suppose, it's just a key point to remember.
Okay.
And I suppose two things just to cover off on George as well. I know we're out on podcast, but on pasture base there's a tool called the grazing calculator. Okay, and when you're in cover data, when you open the pasture base app and you're in cover data, the grazing calculator is about halfway down, and it is difficult enough at the minute. There's fresh calvers being added to, say, a group that's going to grass, on the daily, so areas are changing. There's different covers in paddocks, and also demand probably ratcheting up a little bit there. Cows are eating a little bit more, if they're 2 or 3 weeks calved. So there's a grazing calculator there that all you do is you stick in the paddock number, the cover will be there, and it has the area. And all you have to do then is put the number of animals that's going to grass, and it will give you, based on the paddock, the amount of days grass that are there in that paddock. And you can also actually put in the length and width of the paddock, which will give you, or say the length of the paddock if it's a fairly square rectangular paddock, and it'll give you that allocation that maybe where to set up your temporary wire. Now, look, as it is, it's trial and error, but this is just this little tool on the pasture base app is just a good guide, for the next number of weeks.
Okay. Enough, Joseph. Thanks very much. That's fantastic.
Perfect. Great stuff, George. Thank you.
What we'll do is we'll be back next week, and I hope to have John on next week to give us our Grass 10 update. Thanks very much, Joseph, for that, and the best of luck in the week ahead.
No problem. Thank you, George.
Right, guys, we're going to move over now, and we're going to have a chat with Niall from UCD Lyons. Good morning, Niall, and welcome to our little webinar here. Thanks very much.
Morning, George. Thanks very much for having me.
Okay. Now, Niall is a technologist based at the Lyons Research Farm, where he is kind of overseer for the whole herd at the Lyons Estate. But what we're here to talk to you about this morning, Niall, isn't so much the whole herd, but what we call the UCD systems herd, that high genetic merit, high yield potential group of 57 cows that you're running at the farm. So maybe what we do ask is, first of all, give us a kind of a pen picture of the scale of the unit that you're dealing with, or that farmlet, Niall, first, please.
Yeah, so I suppose we set up the farmlet in kind of 2015, 2016, just on the back of the abolition of the quotas. Yeah. Looking at a kind of I suppose a pedigree Holstein higher output cow. Yeah. Or focusing on a high output grass-based system on a limited land block. So the land block in total is 24 hectares. We've 17.43 hectares of a milking platform. Yeah. And then 7 hectares of an out farm that we use exclusively for silage.
Okay.
So the cows are kind of set on that 17.4 hectares, are set 57 cows, and it's kind of trying to mimic, I suppose, a commercial 57 or 60 cow herd kind of thing originally it was set up for.
Okay. Now that's 3.4 cows per hectare on the milking platform, and a whole farm stocking rate of a cow to the acre.
Right, yeah. 3.27 we are now. So 17.43. So we're compliant with the new banding system at the same time.
Okay. Maybe you tell us a bit first of all, Niall, about how the herd, before we move on and talk about what your plans are for this coming spring, just tell us about performance of the herd in 2022, just to give people an idea.
So I suppose 2022 was, I suppose, no more than everybody else. It was a tough enough year. We're a very dry farm here, which is a help and a hindrance. A great help, as Joseph was saying, getting cows out early in the spring, but we suffer very much from drought then in the summertime. So our grass growth is less of a curve, more of a flat line in the summertime. So we've had a lot of silage we had a very wet spring here. So last year we had only about 4 days of grazing in February altogether. We didn't get out really till March properly. So they were on exclusively pretty much a concentrate and silage diet. And then over the summer, we had to reintroduce silage as well because grass covers had got we were really floating towards that 500 cover that Joseph was saying to not fall under.
Okay.
So in general, the 57 cows, we sold 562 kilos of milk solids, and roughly about 7,100 kilos of milk, or litres of milk.
Okay.
Last year. Now,
so it's a decent enough milk yield. How did the breeding season go then last year, Niall?
We typically have a good breeding. Well, I say good breeding season. It is good. Yeah, last year we submitted 56 of the 57 cows. So of those,
3 weeks. They were all in the first 3 weeks now.
They were all in the first 26 days. So we held one lady didn't go to the bull at all due to poor udder conformation. So we submitted 56 in total. The 3-week submission rate was 87.5%.
Yeah.
Of that, then our conception to first service was 79% of those 87%. And then our 6-week in-calf rate is 84% in the cows. So
it's, fairly good now. There's nothing wrong with those. That's with conventional semen, Niall, is it?
That's all with conventional semen, yeah, and 100% AI. So we do 6 weeks of Frisian semen and 4 weeks of beef semen then, kind of as mop up towards the end.
What about the maiden heifers then? How do they get on?
The maiden heifers, we did 70% conception, 76% submission rate in that first 3 weeks, which we were disappointed in. And of that, only now we had 100% conception in the first 3 weeks to those, but then overall our heifer performance wasn't fantastic. I would say more due, it's less about the fertility, when the fertility in the cows is quite good, and more so we keep a tighter eye on them. In general, the heifers are contract reared outside that 24 hectare platform. That's the system is set up for contract rear, and so
but between heifers and cows, you're planning on an 8-week calving period this year, isn't that right?
Yeah, so we found that the typical calving interval for us, or the gestation, is kind of 276. So we're slightly shorter in general over the last kind of 5 years. Our average has been maybe a week shorter than that 283 days.
Yeah.
So on the 283 set, we were due to start on the 8th of February, and our last cow would be due on the 7th of April. So nearly 8 weeks bang on to the day.
That was planned, but you started slightly early, 26th, I think you told me.
Yes, we started on the 26th then. So we had our first heifer calved on the 26th, and we have 21 cows calved as of this morning.
About 40% or something, is it? Or?
Yes. So we're slow enough actually to get started, but that was reflected in our the AI as well. We had a slow first week. We started in the first week of May, so the 3rd of May this year, with the bank holiday falling. So that was the Tuesday. It's quite enough first week. We'd kind of hope for obviously 30% in the 3 weeks. We only got about 15 to 17% in the first week.
Yeah.
And it slowly crept up, but we got a big glut of them then in the 3rd week. So this week now we have a good jump of them. Should be on anyway.
Okay, maybe we'll move on now and talk about the real meat that we came to talk to you about today, which is about the spring grassland management at Lyons. Just tell us what's going on and what are the plans for the couple of weeks ahead.
Yeah, so I suppose more than anything, preparation is key. So we started in the autumn, really planning out our covers and where we were wanting to go, where we wanted to open with. So myself and Anthony, the research technician on this project, went through it. As I said, we're quite a dry farm, so even our wettest paddocks are fairly accessible. They're not too bad. But we'd kind of earmarked a couple of smaller paddocks closer to the farm that were dry. So we have the cows out since the 7th of February. We'd only maybe 7 cows to go at the start, giving them small breaks. We were lucky enough, once we went out, we stayed out. So they've been out since the after milking on the 7th. And they've been out day and night.
Full time, yeah. Which we're very lucky now. The last kind of 2 days, we've had quite heavy rain. So we started, I was back fencing them as we went. We weren't doing any marking anyways, because ground conditions have been super. But the last kind of couple of days now, I've been back fencing them and spur roading them into those backs of paddocks.
are the smaller paddocks. We have some pure tetraploid paddocks with clover mix in them. So I earmark them to get them out first at lower covers. So kind of going in at covers of 900, that we could get it whipped off. And that tetraploid with the high sugar and kind of high palatability get good intakes into the cows straight away as soon as they get out as soon as they calf, they're out to grass.
Just give us a reminder now. Joseph was talking there about farm covers in a lot of places around the 700. What's the farm cover at Lyons at the moment?
We're actually quite strong. We're at 1,018.
Yeah.
We closed at about 650, which should be typical enough for us. So our winter growth was fairly steady, all right. But it was kind of the same, I suppose, a lot. We didn't get too much real heavy frost. We only got a couple of days of heavy frost that kind of knocked it back. We've seen maybe the heavier covers suffer a little bit with that frost, getting a little bit burnt. But overall, in general, we've a good cover and a nice wedge, which we'll need now for that. We'll get a big burst of grazing power very quickly. So we need kind of those covers. We'll fairly mow through them once cows really start to calf, or once we get a good number going.
And now, did you say you spread any fertilizer yet?
We haven't to date. Now we're actually waiting on protective urea to go out. We were just stuck with supply, but it's going today or tomorrow, hopefully. Ideally, we'd have it out nearly a week at this stage or more. And we'd blanket spread about 28 units across the whole farm.
Just tell us a bit then, Niall, about kind of freshly calved cows, how you manage them when they're calved. We were talking about this yesterday, yeah.
Yes, yeah. So kind of more than the grass preparation, we're kind of prep way back at dry off. So having them in a body condition score of kind of 2.75 to 3, that they have that kind of little window to maybe put on a little bit of condition over the dry period and not have any kind of calving issues with over conditioned. So we're aiming to kind of calve them down at 3 to 3.25. As soon as they calf, then we give them 2 kilos of concentrate either in the calving pen or when they're kind of freshly milked, pretty much straight away, and a feed of silage straight away as soon as they're kind of up and willing to take it. So it gives a nice indication if she's willing to eat it. She's probably not ketotic. If she's kind of happy enough to take concentrate, and it fills that 35 or 40 kilo void, it fills up the room and kind of weighs it down, and where we'd hope it would deter from LDAs or any displaced abomasums, and it just kind of keeps her a bit more content, gets her body back in action, because it's quite a stressful period, obviously postpartum.
But if she calves, say, overnight, she'll get her feed and her silage, but she'll go out the next day to graze then, will she?
Yeah, she'll go out straight away. So if she calves at 2 o'clock in the morning, the night calfer will give her 2 kilos and her load of silage, and she'll get milked in the parlour. She'll get 2 kilos in the morning in the parlour as well, and she goes straight to grass then.
Okay. What's the grass allowance there now? What are you planning on? Yeah.
So they're allowed 12 kilos of grass once they go to grass. We front load a lot of our concentrate, so they're on 1,500 kilos across the whole year. But for the first 60 days post calving, they're on 8 kilos. So they build up to the 8 kilos over 6 or 7 days. So they'll start on 4 kilos in day 1, so 2 in the morning, 2 in the evening, and go up half a kilo each day until they've hit their 8 kilos. And then they'll be on 4 kilos in the morning, 4 kilos in the evening for the first 60 days.
Right, it's big. But the milk yield of these cows is pretty strong, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where would you see yourselves typically being in early March now in terms of milk volume?
We'll hopefully kind of average about 28, 32 kilos, depending on kind of how many heifers have calved or mature cows. But we'll peak roughly on average about 36 to 38 litres of milk.
Yeah.
In a good year, we'd peak, we'd break the 3 kilos of milk solids at peak. Okay. But it's all kind of peak and high to sustain high in all the systems I've worked in. It's the same. If they don't peak high, they can't claw it back really.
Yeah. And look, the weather has been fairly good. A little bit sticky now, maybe the last couple of days. You're going okay. They're out full time. What will happen if you get a wet week or a wet 3 or 4 days? What do you do then?
We'll have to house, I suppose, if we're usually, even though we're a very dry farm, Anyone that's been here, we've the hill kind of just over our shadow, and that kind of gives us a bit of a microclimate in that even when we get good rain, it's not too bad because the land is dry, but we get a wicked bad cold or a very cold wind comes across there, and we're quite an exposed platform. So it's more to do with shelter for the cows rather than that they're kind of happy enough to graze away in the rain. Sometimes once it's not torrential, but we'll house them if we do get a wet week. We'll house them and try and do on-off grazing to the best of our ability. Anyways, 3 hours post milking, morning and evening, to get out for that 6 hour allocation if we can, if kind of weather allows. That's where it kind of gets complicated, where we have to really start getting inventive with spur roads and creative with the paddocks.
I know. So far, so good. Anyway, it's a good season for Lions.
So far, touch wood, yeah.
If our audience has any questions for Niall at this stage, we'll just take a few, and if we don't, we're going to wrap it fairly soon. I suppose one last question I have for you there, Niall. What do you do with a very thin cow in the spring? You get one or two maybe that are not great.
Yeah, we will. We've had a couple of twins now this year that they'll be fairly kind of shook after calving. So we typically give them once a day. So those kind of cows that are thin postpartum or post calving or thin coming into calving, they'd be fairly on target for milk fever and ketosis. So you give them a Keckstone, especially for twins. Keckstone bolus you get from your vet, making sure they have plenty of calcium, and then once a day milking would be our kind of solid recommendation. And by once a day milking, it's only milking them once a day, but still bringing them into the parlour and feeding them twice a day. So sometimes we get that the confusion that farmers are leaving them in the paddock to conserve energy for that second milking, but they need that extra concentrate. So bring them in and just not milking them, even for the first 6 weeks, giving them that once a day shouldn't affect milk yield over the year. And beyond 6 weeks, you might start impacting the overall milk yield. But the first 6 weeks, they'll bounce back fairly quickly, and you won't see any kind of long-lasting impact on it.
Okay, and that's very good. Okay, guys, we've no questions in there from our participants in the meeting. I'm happy with what you've covered there, and I think it's given us a good insight into where you're going. I suppose just the last thing that we didn't cover maybe was, so the plans are to graze roughly a third in February, a third in the first half of March,
and then the remaining kind of 40% then up until about the 6th to the 8th of April would be our start of our second round. But
will you have to supplement with silage if you're giving them allowance of 12 kilos of grass at some stage? Will you kind of get a bit tight for grass?
We hopefully shouldn't. The allocation will actually lift as they go further on. So we'll actually have an allocation of 15 kilos and the 8 kilos as we kind of get into peak to get energy into them. Hopefully we have a growth rate of about 6. It all depends on the weather. If we get very wet weather or if we get caught at any stage, we will supplement with silage, but ideally we'll live in a wing and a prayer, and hopefully they'll do on the grass, or we'll have enough grass growing continuously for them.
Okay, that's great. Thanks very much, Niall. Look, ladies and gentlemen, on your behalf, I'll thank our two speakers today. First, Joseph, who's back complaining about you grazing too much now in some places. I'm disgusted with that, Joseph. Look, they're doing great, right? And secondly, Niall, there, for giving us kind of a good update on where they are at Niall at the UCD Lyons on that systems herd and what the plans are for the months ahead. Thanks very much, guys, and look at safe farming for the coming week. We'll talk to you all again next week.
Guys.